Hey, welcome to Film Fanatics. We are three film geeks discussing movies, both new and old. My name is Dan.
My name is Justin.
And I'm Joe.
This week we reviewed two sequels, one animated and one an R-rated comedy, and our home media moment is the film adaptation of a cult TV show. In our triple feature of older movies, we'll review new classic Brave, my pick for old classic Howard Stern's Private Parts, and Oscar-winning foreign film Amarcord. Inspired by Pixar's Brave, our top 5 this week is going to be the top 5 Disney princesses. It'll be an interesting list. But first up, as our home media moment this week is going to be the television show Veronica Mars, which has just come out on DVD. I wanted to talk to you guys at the top of the show here about Kickstarter. This was sort of the first big Kickstarter movie. It made over $2 million in donations from people. If you don't know what Kickstarter is, Justin, do you want to sort of explain it a little bit?
Kickstarter is basically this independently funded site online where filmmakers can basically go out and say, we have this project, if you donate this much money, we have certain packages for you, like you can receive a copy of the movie, or you get executive producer status. It depends on project to project.
Well, and it's not just for film. I mean, obviously, we'll probably be talking mostly about film, but there's comic
Shorts.
books, board games,
Pretty much anything.
TV
creative.
shows, books, anything. Anything that sort of involves a creative outlet that you might need money to produce on a massive scale. Yeah, Veronica Mars was sort of the first big name in this, and shortly after that, Zach Braff started one for his movie that'll be coming out later this summer called Wish I Was Here. And he actually got a little bit of blowback on that because a lot of people were saying, well, Zach Braff has enough money to fund his own movie. Whether that's true or not, could be debatable. But Kevin Smith also sort of got his hand in the game a little bit, and then a couple days after he posted one, I forget what the project was for. It wasn't Clerks 3 or anything, but whatever his project was, he actually pulled it after a couple days because he realized, you know what, I'm Kevin Smith. I don't want people to think,
You're screwing them over.
Yeah, that I'm screwing them over, because Zach Braff really got a lot of blowback. Justin, are you familiar with the Zach Braff thing?
A little bit. I mean, I heard about it with other projects. The Spike Lee one was the big one that I remember hearing a lot about. My personal opinion, I see where people are coming from with this, but I think it's really a fantastic way to see how these projects are translating with the public opinion. Obviously, half the battle of getting a movie made is pitching it to somebody who's willing to fund it. Obviously, with studios, that's a much bigger deal, but with normal audiences, that tells you if people are actually interested. Mm-hmm. And I think it's a really great new advancement in the way movies and other media outlets are going to be handled, and I really hope they expand on it in the future.
I think a lot of the issue with the Zach Braff thing and the Spike Lee one, I guess I hadn't heard about that one, but I guess that sort of falls in the same category, is that people are sort of a little bit touchy because it's the basis of Kickstarter was to sort of get something from the ground up, and when you have a high-profile actor with millions of Twitter followers and such, like a Zach Braff, I'm sure does, it sort of maybe overshadows some of the quieter projects out there. And so, okay, I have $100 that I want to put on Kickstarter. Am I going to fund the Zach Braff movie or the No Name Johnson movie that might sound interesting, but I don't know where that money's going to go and what's going to happen with it? So I think that sort of is where the
popularity contest.
Yeah, it sort of becomes a popularity contest, which in one respect is fine, because like Justin said, it does sort of give people a feel for maybe how you gauge the reaction to the possibility of the project. But right, at the same time, it's like if you've got the millions of Twitter followers of a Kevin Smith or a Spike Lee,
you probably could find a way to get other money.
Right. And for Veronica Mars, it was more of a rights issue. Warner Brothers wasn't going to distribute the movie or make the movie because they hold the rights to the TV show, and they didn't think there was an audience for it, to be honest. So with the Kickstarter, they found out not only is there an audience for it, but we're going to shatter records. They were the first movie to make $1 million in donations. They were the first movie to make $2 million in donations. So obviously Warner Brothers said, okay, cool, we'll distribute it then if you've obviously got the money for it. But yeah, Joe, what are your thoughts on the whole thing?
I think Kickstarter is awesome. I mean, I think a lot of independent people could use it to fund their own projects. I think there is a risk, though, in kind of wondering, okay, you're donating money to something that you're not entirely sure is going to pan out. Mm-hmm. But then I guess if it doesn't pan out, you can get your money back. As far as I know.
I believe that's how it works.
I don't know, but I do think there is a potential for it to kind of overshadow some people, and I guess that's kind of the problem with the overall purpose of it.
Right.
There's always going to be some element of that gets corrupted, but it's kind of awesome that, fans were able to bring something to life purely by interest. So it could bring a lot of things to light that we think might not have been able to be possible before from the fans.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. I think it's a great idea. And yeah, my perception of it, Joe, is that you have a certain goal amount, and if the project does not reach that goal, then it gets shut down. They put a date on it. Usually it's like a month or something or whatever. And then if it doesn't reach that goal, the donators get their money back because obviously the project isn't going to move forward. That's my understanding of it. So, it does give a little more security to, like, if you're donating to something you've never heard of. A lot of bands are doing this now, too, because obviously the record label game isn't quite what it once was. And so a lot of artists musically have to sort of do it on their own. Hey, fund my new record. And like Justin said, you get some perks for... I mean, in most cases, not every Kickstarter is the same, but...
I guess it depends on how much, money or marketing you have to begin with. Like, if you're a nobody, you might not be able to do that much. But hey, if you're doing an independent film and the person that donates the most, executive producer type,
right?
That's kind of cool.
And that's something you can put on a resume, which is even cooler.
I funded a film. Oh, how interesting.
Yeah. Well, and what's nice is most of the things on Kickstarter are tangible items. So, like for Veronica Mars, for example, if you donated, X amount of dollars, you got a copy of the Blu-ray and DVD when it came out. You get a poster.
That's awesome.
Maybe a T-shirt or whatever. Same thing with the music. You get a copy of the CD or whatever it may be. So, I mean, I think it's definitely a really cool idea. If you have some extra bucks and you want to... Veronica Mars was great because I think it brought light to Kickstarter. I had never heard of it before that happened.
Been around for a while.
It's probably been around for years before that.
But that's the first big thing.
That was the first really big one that I think people took notice to. And... you go on there and you just search, okay, what's a cool book, that might be coming out. You search the genre and, hey, I'm trying to write a mystery book about such and such. And you're like, oh, that sounds interesting. I'll throw in $5. I think it is a cool way to get new things out there that maybe...
Yeah, no, it's cool.
...might not have existed otherwise. All right, well, our new release slate this week kicks off with... a movie from me and Joe's top 5 most anticipated of 2014 when we did that list in December, and that is How to Train Your Dragon 2, and Joe's going to tell us about that.
How to Train Your Dragon 2, a sequel to the very successful 2010 fantasy adventure based on the award-winning children's book, stars Jay Baruchel as Hiccup, Gerard Butler as his father Stoic, as well as returning cast members such as Jonah Hill, Kirsten Wiig, and Craig Ferguson. The film also brings talent such as Cate Blanchett and Jimon Hounsou. Director Dean DeBlois returns as well. The film follows the original some 5 years later, with dragons having been integrated into Viking society, but with Hiccup still trying to figure out what he wants to do with his life, even as his father wishes him to take the reins of chief. This development is interrupted when Drago Bloodfist, a power-hungry madman, is attempting to gain control of all the dragons in an attempt to take over the world. Oh, and Hiccup finds out that his mom is alive. I feel like this should have been a spoiler, but due to the marketing, any suspense was lost from that aspect. This is a follow-up that is a pretty good successor to the previous film. It does continue Hiccup's development, though it is a little bit contradictory to the events in the first film. It also expands on the myth of the dragons and even the authentic Viking feel, which I thought was pretty cool. There also really is some good tension between Hiccup and his relationship with Toothless. Also, the introduction of his mother adds to some really great development as well. The humor is mostly good, and the animation is pretty on par as well. However, I feel that this film does lack some of the magic that the original possessed. This is partially because there's too much going on. The side characters are still there, but they have less screen time and they just feel kind of like they're shoved in unnecessarily to me. Also, as mentioned, while the introduction of the mother is great, they revealed it all in the trailer, so it sabotaged most of the emotional weight of the reveal. Then there is the death of a certain character. I liked this character, and its death happens so suddenly and it's so rushed that you barely have time to deal with it, and then the plot just kind of moves on. It isn't handled horribly, but it could have been executed better. Though I will admit it was a bold move. Then we come to the villain. While more consistent than the king from Maleficent, Draco is almost as poorly developed. For most of the movie, we build up to him, then we meet up with him, and he seems, well, just kind of generic. Then they give him some hint of an interesting motivation, and then the movie's over. Sadly, I'm not entirely sure he was really necessary. Overall, though, Dragon 2 is a good family film with some good humor, animation, and a decent story with characters we care about. Was it as mind-blowing as the original? No, but that would be expecting way too much, and I give it a B.
Yeah, I thought the first How to Train Your Dragon was such a surprise. The trailers did not make it look that compelling. Went to see it, just blew me away. I came out of it as one of my top 10 films of the year. By comparison, I do think the second one is a bit of a letdown, and Joe hit on several of the reasons why. It's possible that I was expecting a little too much with it, but the story just isn't quite as engaging as in the first one. And as you mentioned, the big reveal of the film holds zero emotional weight.
Did they do that?
I don't know, because it could have been such a monumental moment in the series, and certainly in Hiccup's journey, and it isn't
Because
at all.
Spoiled everything.
Yeah. Now, the voice work is great, particularly by Baruchel and Butler. I just wish there were a little more time spent, as Joe also said, on characterization and less on the battle scenes, both between the family dynamic and everybody else. Like you mentioned, some of the side characters from the first one, they're here, but they have like a throwaway line here, a throwaway line there. There's no real development there. The villain is like generic, poorly constructed, I guess. But the crowning achievement of How to Train Your Dragon 2, much like the first one upon its release, is the animation. I'm not even sure how this is from the same studio that brought us The Croods and Turbo, two very average-looking movies. The amount of detail in this movie is nothing short of astounding. Things like the facial hair and freckles on Hiccup's face, the scales on the dragons, the cracks and minutia on the rocks. It all just looks gorgeous, and of course the flight scenes as well. But still, I just wish there were more here story-wise. I give the film a B+. Justin?
What I've always loved about How to Train Your Dragon as a franchise is, unlike so many films that are geared towards family audiences, these films actually strive for good storytelling. There's no cheap ploys such as needless dance numbers or what I commonly refer to as cute humor, but rather a compelling narrative set in a world truly beckoning the viewer to take it all in and explore. The new additions this time add some interesting new perspective, namely from the ever-talented Cate Blanchett playing Hiccup's mother, and continuously fantastic action. Unfortunately, this time around, the story does get a little predictable, and the trailer revealed way too much, but this does get improved upon as it goes on, offering up a truly exciting conclusion. Is How to Train Your Dragon 2 as good as the first film? No, but as Gerard Butler would say at the end of the first film, you gave it your best shot. And I give it a B+.
It sort of begs this question of, how do you market a movie without some kind of big reveal like that audience are getting for free on television? The Dragon series currently runs all the time, and this explains probably why the movie opened in second place this weekend after a movie that we're going to talk about next, 22 Jump Street. I mean, people were surprised by that. They expected a lot more, dollar-wise. And I wonder if they felt like, okay, to set this apart from the show. I've never watched the show, but obviously his mom's not in the show. Mm-hmm. So what a huge, coup that, we find out who his mother is in the movie. Without that tidbit, which granted is, like you said, Joe, a huge spoiler, how do you get audiences to pay for a movie that they see for free on TV?
About this? Hiccup, there's something I have to tell you. There's a secret. It's about your family's destiny.
Yeah, okay. Something like that.
That, like every movie uses to get people to see
that's true.
It's not that hard.
I suppose that's true.
It's not really. I don't know what they did. That was a huge blunder.
Well, they could have even just, done the whole mysterious figure thing and had that go on for a little bit, and then leave the big reveal for the movie itself, which would have been so much better.
Yep.
I mean, part of the reason I think we gave this lower grades than anticipated was because the marketing for this movie was terrible. They showed way too much.
I'm just going to go out on a limb here and say that the theme of 2014 is bad marketing.
I agree with that. And I do think, Joe, you hit on something as well. The death scene in this movie
Makes me mad.
is like, oh, it's glossed over. I mean, they spend a little bit of time on it, but it happens very quickly, and then they have a funeral,
cuteness.
and then they go back to,
Cuteness.
it's not cuteness, because they're at a war. I mean, they go back to fighting the war, but...
They do, but the next scene transition is what we kind of refer to as the transition between Bambi's mother getting shot, spoilers, and then the next scene immediately following with bunnies and flowers. It's not quite that extreme, but it's basically like that.
But in its defense, Joe, how is that any different from The Amazing Spider-Man 2? Depression for about 30 seconds, followed by, oh, look, stupid rhino attacking in stupid robot suit, followed
That was also
they spent a lot more time with it in Spider-Man, I think.
Yeah, and
I don't know. I mean,
plus that
I'd
was also
say
the end of the
pretty close to about the same
movie
time.
as there was a whole third act to follow.
My issue with it wasn't in the handling, wasn't exactly that I thought they were too happy and cutesy with it, because I just thought there wasn't enough time spent on it.
Did you care that much? As much as you could have?
No. I teared up a little bit. Not enough to take my glasses off. That's my staple in a movie. If I take my glasses off, that means I'm really crying.
It's true.
But yeah, like I wanted there to be another couple of minutes spent with it.
Maybe it's not so much...
And they didn't. They just went back to fighting the war. I also wonder how they're going to work that into the show. Because the show is a continuation of the films, and I assume any upcoming shows would take place after How to Train Your Dragon 2.
They're canon, so...
Yeah.
Does that mean the mom's going to be an addition?
I don't know. I mean, obviously, Kate Blanchett's not going to voice her in the show. I mean, that would be silly, but...
Well, I don't know. Some people have actually been doing...
I was going to say, stranger things have happened.
Yeah. These days, a lot of big actors going to TV is a lot more common than it used to be.
Yeah, TV, like, on HBO or TNT, not cartoon voices for How to Train Your Dragon. When you're an Oscar-winning...
People...
Johnny
Oscar
Depp did
winners
it.
do voice acting.
SpongeBob
He had a regular role on SpongeBob.
did a couple episodes.
A couple episodes is not what we're talking about. We're talking about integrating the mother into the entire show. Kate Blanchett isn't doing an entire season of episodes. I mean, I don't see that happening.
I know Rosario Dawson's done some voice acting stuff.
Yeah, I mean, that's not quite on the same level. You know what I mean? I mean, yeah, Jay Baruchel does the voice, but it's like...
He's kind of a medium...
He's Jay Baruchel.
Yeah.
America Ferrera reprises her role, but it's like, after Ugly
Yeah.
Betty, where was she, you know?
Wow.
So I don't know. I assume they will integrate the mother character into the show, though.
Yeah, I guess so.
You know?
I don't know.
I mean, they made such a big deal of it with the previews.
I was just disappointed by it.
Yeah, it was a little disappointing overall. Well, with that in mind, let's move on to the movie that beat it this weekend. One of the highest R-rated comedy openings of all time, around 60 million for this weekend, and that is 22 Jump Street. This one was in my top 5 most anticipated for 2014. And in the film, Jonah Hill and Channing Tatum return as undercover cops who go by Doug and Brad McQuaid when they're on assignment. And this time they are enrolled in college to find a drug supplier, just like in the first Jump Street film 2 years ago. It's one of many things that are rehashed from that movie, and 22 is not even kind of shy about pointing that out to us. It's just some of the complete self-referential and self-deprecating humor that sets this one aside from the first film, starting off with a previously on sequence reminiscent of what you'd see on the old TV show that these films are based on. Even with practically the exact same storyline, 22 takes some great and funny sidesteps with his characters, including a particularly hilarious couple of awkward scenes with Hill and Ice Cube as the head of Jump Street. Most of the faces we loved from the first movie are back in some fashion, and though there's no Johnny Depp this time around, there are some great cameos. And it also has very possibly the greatest end credits sequence in cinema history. It's the funniest film by a clear mile so far in 2014, and one of the best films, period. Like the first film in the series, it gets an A from me. Joe, what did you think of 22 Jump Street?
Well, there's a slight difference in the number.
That is true.
No, I think that one of the things that I actually really liked about the first movie that they actually like kind of upped the ante on with this one was the meta humor.
Mm-hmm.
Like there was so much of it, and I think that's really what differentiates it from the first one. If it hadn't been for that, it could have easily gone another way, but that was a key factor for me. I thought,
Well, and it even goes outside the Jump Street universe when there's a White House Down crack that Channing Tatum makes.
it's just great, and I
Yeah.
guess if you're a Tatum fan, you'll know exactly what's going on. It's just funny, for moviegoers in general. And I thought their performances were great. I think these guys just have great chemistry together, and I think that individually they might have been funnier than the first one. Their comedic timing is just perfect, and yes, they did kind of recycle some things, and obviously that doesn't feel as fresh, but once again, the angle they take with it kind of keeps it alive, and they acknowledged it. Ice Cube was great.
Yeah.
He was, I don't know, I loved that he was actually a bigger part in this. And yes, the ending credits were hilarious. I'm not sure where they're going to go after that, because I feel like they kind of really let everything slide there. But personally, because it does rehash basically everything from the first one, I can't say that it's technically as good as the first, but I will give it a slightly lower grade, being an A-.
Okay. I'll take it. Justin?
Every year, there seems to be one film where I find myself in a love-hate relationship when thinking about what grade it deserves, and this year it's 22 Jump Street. Ordinarily, I wouldn't have an issue with this, but the problem stems from it doesn't really feel like an actual sequel so much as more or less of a commentary on the way film studios handle them. Yes, there's a story involved, albeit it rarely goes out of what has been seen before, such as in the original, and on several occasions tramples on the territory set forth by the prior film. But more often than not, it all continues to go back to the original plan to more or less parody sequels as a whole. While this remains funny throughout the film, and the chemistry between Hill and Tatum continues to be spot on, the best of this does not come until the very, very end of the film. Admittedly, the wait is worth it, but as a sequel to the original film, it's admirable, but not as good, and I give it a B.
I think that the first one is slightly better because it's slightly more original. But the simple fact that almost all comedy sequels specifically really follow that formula of do the same thing, do it bigger, and there you've got the movie. And in a movie like, say, The Hangover 2, it really, really didn't work because it was really frustrating that they were doing the same things. This one,
The plot requires it.
the plot requires it, and it it throws it into the humor. And listen, these movies are way funnier than the Hangover movies. Period.
Oh, no.
I don't think anybody can debate that. But the fact that they're utilizing that method as a commentary while doing the things from the first movie that worked, it's different enough that the commentary works because they're not really doing the exact same thing.
But it's pretty close.
Their assignment is the same.
Yeah.
But that's their job.
Right, but that's their job. Everything that happens aside from that is not just running over the same gags.
The villain's different.
The villain's different. Did you think they were just recycling all the same jokes and stuff?
I don't know. I mean, like I said, it is pretty similar, and the humor is different. I'll grant you that. That's part of the issue I had with it, is because it tramples on a lot of the stuff that was really funny from the original.
Like what? I'm curious.
Like, for example, them playing on the tropes that have been like action movie stereotypes, completely axed.
I thought they had some of that in this one.
But this time they're more going over trampling on the tropes of sequels.
Which is fine, but that works for a standalone movie, not necessarily a sequel.
Well, remember the scene towards the end with the grenade? I thought that was a huge play towards action movies.
I mean, sort of, but I mean, like I said, it doesn't feel like an actual sequel. It feels like, hey, we needed a new idea. This would work, but we want to stick it in 22 Jump Street and call it a sequel anyways, but it's only sort of quasi-sequel.
I could see that a little bit.
Yeah.
Because it's so meta, though.
Yeah, I mean, the meta humor is fine. I think it's funny. I think, for the most part, it worked. Some of it I thought was kind of annoying, to be honest with you.
Really?
The only thing that really got to me about the meta humor was they did talk a lot about the expense of everything and how that joke got a little thin.
It got really pretentious.
Yeah, well, I don't know if pretentious is the right word, but it got a joke ran a little thin.
I thought it worked for me. Like,
but
this is something Iron Man should have.
Yeah, like the first couple times I did it, I was fine with it.
Okay.
But that was the only one that I thought, like, okay, you can kind of give this one a rest now.
No,
but everything else,
it was a clever jab. It's just when that ends up being your entire repertoire, it kind of gets. It's like you said, it gets stale. I think that's where this one faltered a lot. The chemistry is still there. The overall storyline, outside of the similar nature, works. I wish that they had at least played somewhat more between the lines of the first film instead of just doing their own thing this time around. 21 Jump Street is more or less more or less of a like consistent action comedy. 22 Jump Street is more or less of a parody. I mean, I'll grant you that
first one's sort of a parody of the original show.
Yes,
sort of ish, but I mean, still generally respecting the show.
Well, I think so. You're saying
Not
you thought
really.
you thought the first one was parodying the show, whereas this one's just parodying itself.
Parodying distribution of sequels. Audiences want the same story,
but it's still using the same structure to make that story, though.
Not really.
The story's there. Like I mean, it's the same basic thing.
Like 21 Jump Street, they're going parody, but they're making it a little less obvious what they're parodying. This one, it's like so blatantly in your face, it's kind of like you don't need to do half this stuff.
I don't think the tone of these movies are different just based on the fact that they're both basically parodies. What they're parodying may be different.
That's true, definitely.
But they're both still essentially parody, comedy, action movies. I loved it. Joe liked it. Justin not so much, but Justin wasn't as hot on the first one as
I give it a B. So I mean, it's not a negative review by any stretch of the word.
No, I mean, you gave it a positive review.
And based on your B plus from the first one, it sort of makes sense.
Yeah.
And as an aside, Phil Lord and Chris Miller are on about the hottest comedy streak. You know, they did the Lego movie earlier this year, 21 Jump Street. So here's hoping, the next one will be just as good. All right, well, up next we're going to talk about Belle, and Justin's going to tell us about that.
Dido Elizabeth Belle, played by Gugu Mbatha Raw, is the illegitimate mixed-race daughter of a Royal Navy admiral, stuck in the middle of the class structure, not fitting into the lower class, yet not fully able to participate in upper-class traditions with her aristocratic great-uncle Lord Mansfield, played by Tom Wilkinson, and his wife, played by Emily Watson. However, when Mansfield begins deliberating on a slavery case in regards to the Zong massacre, Belle begins to work with lawyer and potential suitor John Devannier, played by Sam Reed, to prove them guilty of insurance fraud and abolish slavery in Britain. There are essentially two stories at the heart of Belle, and only one of which is really that interesting. The first of these stories focuses on Dido herself, dealing with class conflict in Britain, particularly with race, and how she manages to deal with that in her private and public lives. Although this is mostly well acted, the narrative of this story is very dry and never really pulls the audience into the story. The second, and significantly better story, focuses on, as I mentioned in my synopsis, the Zong massacre and the apprehension in which Dido plays a pivotal role in whether or not a shipping company is guilty of insurance fraud for an appalling mistreatment of slaves. While the story is incredibly interesting and passionate, particularly in how Dido takes a role in this, and how she continues to pose the big questions to the case, it's only really the center of the movie for roughly half the film, if that. Unfortunately, this often gets interrupted with the first story I mentioned, which is just nowhere near as interesting. Belle is a good film with a few very good performances, and had this made the second story the main focus, would have easily received a higher grade from me. But unfortunately, due to this one playing second fiddle, I have to give Belle a B.
Well, I found Belle to be an elegant and charming film, as much so as many of the characters in it would like to be. Mbatha Raw is subtle, yet very forceful as Dido, and the pacing of the film from director Ama Asante is well done. In fact, with so much going on between the two, and really almost three separate stories, it's surprising that it all blends together as well as it does. I do wish there were a little more time spent on Tom Wilkinson's character, because he seems to be the most complex of the bunch, and we don't really get to spend enough time with him. Also, James Ashford, or the Forehead, as I call him in this film, because Tom Felton's wig is so ridiculous that his face is about 70% forehead, is little more than a bully, and we don't get to delve deeper there either. The costumes are fantastic, but the look of the film is a bit drab and washed out for this type of grand story. Belle mostly comes together well, though, and I have to say, Justin, I was actually interested pretty equally in both of the stories that they were telling. And led by Mbatha Raw and Sarah Gadon's great performances and a strong script, I give Belle an A-. I sort of wish, like I said, there was a little more time spent on some of the items.
Yeah, I agree with you on that one, actually.
But I actually was pretty engrossed in both of the stories separately. I do wish they came together a little bit more fluidly, and maybe, I mean, Wilkinson's character is sort of the linchpin in both of those.
Yeah.
So I feel like if they had expanded his character a little more, it would have ebbed the stories better together. But I was pretty engrossed in the movie as a whole.
The problem with the first story for me was it just felt so melodramatic. I mean, yes, these things were to be expected, but nothing really popped about it. Nothing really drew me in. It's just melodramatic scene after melodramatic scene after melodramatic scene. They're well acted. They're well filmed. They didn't really keep me that engaged. But when we got to the courtroom stuff and they were talking about this big case, I was really on board. I was really intrigued.
That might just be more your type of thing, though.
That could be, and I'm not going to deny that. But I mean,
yeah, I mean, the other part was sort of the romance and the relationship between
I
her
got
and
a
her
very
sister.
like Mansfield Park kind of vibe. You know?
Downton Abbey.
You know, so I can understand that.
Yeah, I mean, I was actually pretty engrossed in all of it. Unfortunately, Joe was going to try and see it tonight, and the theater canceled the performance. So
flubbed a bit.
So unfortunately, he didn't get to see it. I don't know if you would love it, Joe, but it's certainly interesting. It's definitely well acted.
Yeah, I'd agree with that.
The stuff with the suitors and the boyfriends was a little more dry, I guess, than I would have liked.
But that's how that stuff typically is.
But that's right, exactly. I mean, in a movie like this, I think that's sort of
if it's like 1700s, you know, kind of like Jane Austen-esque, that's the way it always is.
That's true, but there are ways that filmmakers have done that and still kept it interesting and engaging.
Detestable. No.
Yeah, it's like all this, you know...
Snooty.
Yeah, snooty, kind of...
I'm Draco Malfoy and I'm evil.
You got his forehead in that movie. The wigs, I don't know.
Yeah.
Well, that was the style, man.
That was the style.
Can't knock on that.
It really
style.
was, and it was on full display.
Men in heels and skirts, stockings, everything.
But, like, he sort of, you know, comes into this movie as a jerk. He leaves the movie as a jerk.
All right.
And he's a jerk in between.
Help me out here. I like that guy. Mm-hmm. Okay, I think he did a great job with Malfoy.
But why is he always a jerk?
I'm like, can he play anything that's not a jerk? Like, I mean, this Planet of the Apes, like, what?
Yeah.
Well, he did. It was called the Apparition, and it was terrible.
Was it his fault, though?
Actually, no.
See? There you go. Well,
he did go against type, but that is I mean, I gave that movie an F. That's a terrible movie.
Oh, no. Make no mistake, Apparition is horrible.
Well, I'm just saying, like, is this guy just typecast as being the a-hole? Is that what this is?
No, I think he's had a couple other roles where he
the
wasn't...
ones I've
yes,
the most
I think so.
This is the first big trailer I've seen. He's like,
right.
I find her detestable.
Yeah,
well, you found
like,
Harry Potter detestable.
He's a bully and a
Caesar.
racist in this. Like
he's in
terrible.
the other movies.
Like
bully,
he is in everything.
Harry
right?
Potter, racist and bully and apes. So, you know, same thing.
I agree.
You know, come on. Bully and racist, move on, man.
I mean, he does it okay, but, like, yeah, we've seen the performance before.
We've seen it since you were 10, dude.
He is actually the worst part, I think, about the movie. Both character and acting.
Oh, really?
Sorry, Felton. Great guy, I'm sure, but...
I like that guy.
Yeah, his performance wasn't that great, and just the character was...
Detestable.
And I get it. Some people are just detestable. But
hey,
there's no... other than his blatant racism...
There's nothing to him?
There's nothing to him. You know? And at one point he grabs Belle and physically assaults her.
You
it's
think
like
that he's a bit of a caricature?
The heck?
And it's...
But he's evil, don't you guys get it?
It's not really dealt with, which is fine because it was the 1700s and they wouldn't have dealt with it. But still, I don't know. That was... His part of the movie was lacking.
So basically subtract him.
Up the Wilkinson ante, and I'm definitely
movie.
for it. I really wish they would have sort of bridged that gap with his character, and that would have probably made it an A for me.
Probably an A- on my end, too.
Yeah. All right, well, up next in the new release department is our aforementioned Veronica Mars for the home media moment. This is based on the cult TV series that ran for 3 years on the UPN and CW, and starring most of the original cast. The movie sees the title character, played by Belle, return to her old stomping grounds in Neptune, California, 9 years after leaving the town for New York City. She returns to investigate the death of Carrie Bishop, a former classmate turned successful pop star. Veronica's ex, Logan Eccles, played by Jason Dohring, who was currently dating Carrie at the time of her death, is the prime suspect. The film starts with a nice catch-up if you've never seen the series, or it's been so long that you forgot, but Belle certainly does not forget how to play the lead. She dives back into this character with full force, as do most of the other actors. Now, the mystery itself may veer more into TV reunion movie of the week territory for the uninitiated, but for fans of the show, it's a home run. It's got a great soundtrack, plus sharp writing, both hallmarks of the series. Now, granted, I've only seen the first 10 or so episodes years ago when they first aired, but the film certainly made me want to go back and revisit Neptune to catch up on what I missed. Veronica Mars gets a B+ from me. Joe, let's go to you.
I'll start off by saying I actually liked Belle in this.
Okay.
And I enjoyed the low-key way that the film was presented. I liked how it was shot. And I did find the mystery to be somewhat compelling. The characters had this quirkiness to them that I liked. It was kind of reminiscent of Joss Whedon a little bit, but it didn't detract from their humanity too much, which I liked as well. The only real issue I have with this film is that I don't think it's accessible to anyone who's not a fan, really. I mean, or as accessible. I just wish that they had integrated the backstory with the main plot in spurts. I've seen that done better in other films that are based on TV series, rather than the huge exposition dump at the beginning, which is, I understand why it's there, but that's generally considered to be bad writing. Despite that, I did feel like that there was something missing. Still, I found it overall to be an enjoyable watch, and it did get me somewhat interested in the show. And I'd leave it with a B.
Okay. So for you, I mean, both of you have never really seen the show at all. So what I sort of said about for the uninitiated sort of plays more like
I felt like
a TV reunion movie that you weren't invited to.
That perfectly summarizes it, because when I was watching it, I felt like I was watching someone else's movie. Like something was missing for me. Like I liked these characters, but I definitely felt like I didn't really know them.
Okay.
Like I felt like I was missing something.
Yeah.
Like, even like in this whole rushed backstory, okay, but it came too fast that I was already like missing some things. Oh, I moved here. Oh, I moved back. Oh, yeah, then there was this that happened. Slow down a second.
I think what's kind of interesting about that is I wonder if the movie even really needed it.
That's what I was saying. Like,
I think
like,
they could have explained. I think they mainly did that so fans of the show would know, oh, this is what Veronica's been up to for 9 years. Because it doesn't really play into the movie. All you really need to know is she was a high school detective.
Like
now she lives in New York City.
It doesn't really factor in with the main mystery.
Right.
Like
I agree.
It's kind of like, it reminded me, I think this is a little better, but the X-Files movie. It's definitely related to the show, but the plot itself was kind of conducive enough, separate from the show. You didn't need to know the show to know what was going on in the movie. This one I felt like it was a separate side story, more like the second X-Files movie, which I thought was not as good. So, but once again, I don't know much about Veronica Mars, so I kind of gave it the benefit of a doubt. Like, I liked the characters, I liked the dialogue, and I liked the mystery. And the performances were great, the music was good, but I just felt like I didn't know enough about something.
Okay. You weren't as invested.
I didn't feel
as you wanted to be.
I wasn't excited. I'm like, this is decent, but I can tell it's not. I don't know.
Right.
It's not really made for me.
Okay. Justin, what do you think of Veronica Mars?
Although I have never seen a single episode of the show of the same name that it was based on, despite thoroughly investigating the show's narrative in preparation for this review, I felt like this was a very good way to integrate those who had never seen the show without compromising the spirit, something I wish the Firefly film Serenity had taken note of. While I still can't really say that the whole sort of but not really Nancy Drew premise completely sold me, I have to admit I did enjoy a number of the characters and the general hijinks, particularly with lead Belle's uncanny ability to do accent impressions.
Yeah, that is true.
Unfortunately, a good portion of the narrative, particularly with the mystery, I thought was rather predictable, but the humor is always there without overpowering the serious mystery component, and the celebrity cameos are always fun. Although I can't say that Veronica Mars is a perfect movie, it does serve as a major step forward in making advancements in mainstream cinema for Kickstarter, and really does make me curious about what a possible sequel would or could be like. And I give it a B-.
Now, I just have a little question for you, Justin.
Here we go, 45-minute discussion about Serenity.
No, I'm not even going to ask you something. You know, I was not super interested. I'm kind of interested in checking out Veronica Mars now, but I wasn't too blown away by this movie. I had no idea what Firefly was the first time I watched Serenity. Help me out here. Why did that work for me? If it didn't work for you, like what did Veronica Mars do better that Serenity did not? Because apparently that can't be completely true because I really like the film as a standalone movie.
For starters, like I said, Veronica Mars did not compromise the overall tone of the show. I got behind most of the characters in Veronica Mars. Serenity, I generally hated everyone. Until I saw the show, realized who these characters actually were, and I was kind of on board.
Just to say this, I think Veronica Mars is a bit more of a extension, like possibly to keep things going rather than a complete finale.
I feel like the Veronica Mars movie is more akin to maybe the Sex and the City movie,
yes,
in that it's a movie based on a TV show that is no longer on the air. So as opposed to like the Simpsons movie, which obviously I love, but is not that much more than a 4-part episode. Mm-hmm. I think we get sort of more in Veronica Mars and Sex and the City than just like, okay, this is just sort of a supersized episode of the show.
Veronica Mars, I think, is more like Sex and the City, where it's kind of continuing.
Yeah,
on.
I think, the possibility of maybe future installments exists, I think.
Whereas, I think that Serenity was just wrapping things up.
Right.
That's the only reason I brought it up, because I felt like it was a big difference. I don't want to...
I'll be honest, I still treat Serenity as kind of like Sex and the City. I mean, it is a continuation, but, I mean, it can still be expanded upon.
Hopefully.
Certainly this is a movie for the fans, mostly.
Yes.
I mean, I think if you've never seen the show... But when it was on, you were interested in it, but just, I'm watching too many shows, I don't have time to watch it. It might be,
I wanted to check it out.
I think a good entree to somebody that maybe is interested in the show, but never had the time to watch, 50, 60 hours of TV.
I will be honest, it never seemed like my thing, which is why I never really checked it out. Plus, once again, Kristen Bell, I didn't really like her character that much in Heroes. But,
okay. But in this, you like her.
I actually really liked her in this.
Yeah, Veronica Mars is a good, strong, well-written character, and the tone of the show and movie, really, is a lot more akin to another Whedon property, actually, Buffy the Vampire Slayer.
That's what it reminded me of.
Yeah, it's sort of Buffy, instead of a vampire slayer, she's a detective. But it's like the same sort of dialogue-esque stuff,
kind
and
of wittiness and
soundtrack
jargon.
and the way it's shot, and
yeah.
So I think if you're a fan of Buffy and do like a good mystery story, maybe you check out the movie first. If you like that, you go back and see the show. I don't know.
That's fair.
But all right, well, we all gave positives at least.
Yeah.
So, all right, well, now we have our top 5. This is based on Pixar's Brave, which we're going to be talking about as part of our new classic in the triple feature, and that is the top 5 Disney princesses. And we sort of went a little bit out of the box on this. We started with just doing animated classic princesses, and then we've sort of expanded from that. And Joe, we're going to start with you for the top 5. We'll do 5 through 2 on the Disney princesses.
It was my idea. I'm not ashamed to admit it.
That is true. It was your idea. It's a good one.
Yeah, I mean, hey, I just felt like we need to talk about Disney princesses because they're pretty significant. Now, to make things interesting, I will do an honorable mention.
Okay.
And I'll explain my reasoning before you guys kill me. My honorable mention would be Elsa/Anna from Frozen. I think
I'm fine with that.
They're great characters, but they kind of need each other. One of my few issues with Frozen, I felt like it didn't quite... I really like Elsa, and I just didn't think they explored her quite enough because I thought she was an interesting character. So I really consider
I'm totally fine with that. And probably the greatest Disney princess singing voice in Idina Menzel,
Adele
Dazeem, that we've ever heard.
Yes.
I mean, a lot of the classic Disney princesses sing a lot.
Yeah, I'd say she probably has the best voice.
Yeah.
Because she was in... Yeah, definitely. Let It Go is awesome, but we won't belabor
Yeah.
that. Number 5. We'll explore her character further later, but that would be Merida from Brave. I think that she was kind of one of these characters, like some of the other ones on this list, to help change the expectations of gender roles a little bit, creating an adventure based around a mother-daughter relationship, which is something that I'll expand upon more later, which I think is very impressive and really hasn't been done too much. I think that's pretty awesome. Number 4 is Jasmine from Aladdin. I mean, she's a strong-willed character. She's difficult, I think, to like at first, but she really grows on you. She's a very thoughtful, contemplative person. There's some really great chemistry between her and the main character. Number 3, this is the only one that I think is a little more on the unofficial scale, but that's Esmeralda from The Hunchback of Notre Dame. Being one of my favorite Disney movies, actually probably my favorite Disney movie, I think that she's a really interesting character. She's very likable. She's very complicated. I like the fact that she has this really interesting friendship with the main character that doesn't really blossom into a romance exactly. It's more unrequited, which I think is kind of an interesting angle to go with. And number 2, so pretty surprise you guys, is Mulan. She also challenged gender roles. She faced great adversity, which I think is very admirable for a character. She's got some good humor, and she really worked her way up from the bottom. You know, that's just something that really impresses me. I think someone that can achieve that status from humble beginnings and taking on that huge risk, just a great role model to look up to for young girls.
I agree. All right, well, I will start mine off with an honorable mention as well, and that is Merida from Brave, which, again, we'll be talking about soon. But I really loved her entire character. She, like you mentioned, sort of played with the gender stereotypes a bit, and she is really the only one of the Disney princesses that isn't in some way, shape, or form attached to a man. She is her own woman the entire movie. They try to give her a man at the beginning, and she says, no thank you. So I thought that was pretty cool. My number 5 is Giselle from Enchanted. This is the Amy Adams character. I wanted to put her on this list because she's sort of an amalgamation of a lot of earlier Disney princesses that just, there were a lot of good ones that, aren't going to make the cut. Cinderella I wanted to put on here. But she is a sort of caricature, if you will, of a lot of those old school princesses.
I've actually never seen Enchanted.
It's pretty good.
Yeah, I recommend it to you.
Yeah,
No,
it's a very cute movie.
I always get it confused with Ella Enchanted.
Okay, Enchanted is the basically live action princess story.
Okay.
And it has a little bit of cartoon stuff
Mary
like
Poppins
here and
style.
there. Kind of Mary Poppins style. Yeah, there's like birds that fly into her
Cool.
home and stuff. But the romance is really cute. The songs are pretty decent. And obviously I'm a huge Amy Adams fan, so
Of course.
she had to be on the list somewhere. My number 4 is Tiana from The Princess and the Frog.
Black.
Yep. Disney's first African-American princess, as we all know. I loved that she was so independent in that era. It's a movie that takes place close to 100 years ago, and she's very strong-willed. She has these aspirations, dreams of opening her own restaurant. Another great singing voice. One of the Dream Girls actually played her. Mm-hmm. And, just a really good movie if you have not seen it. I know... Have you seen it, Joe?
Yeah, Princess
Okay,
Pearl. Good
because I
movie.
knew Justin had not previous to this week.
And you have now, right?
Yes, he has, and we'll see if she shows up on the list. My number 3 is Fa Mulan.
Of course.
Joe introduced me, obviously, to this character a couple of months ago, right here on Film Fanatics, and, sort of the recurring theme on, I think, both of our lists so far is the strong-willed female that sort of broke through some of the old conventions. And they did kind of set her up with a man, but again, she didn't really need one. She didn't want one. She was Fa Mulan. My number 2 is definitely a classic. She's not quite falling into the strong-willed one, but that is Snow White. Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs for a long time, I think I've mentioned this on the show before, was my all-time favorite animated film. What I like about Snow White is that she is just so kind-hearted. She doesn't really have a mean bone in her body, and she really just wants to spread love into the world, and I like that, and I've always just liked her. You don't like that choice?
It's one of those instances where there's somebody on the list who's going to be iconic. I considered putting Ariel on my top 5 list. But I think I'm going for the characters that I think are the best written, and I think they're the best exemplified of what the princess can be and going beyond the conventions. Now, Snow White's probably like one of the least offenders of this, but there are individuals like Cinderella or Sleeping Beauty who don't really have as much character, or they're not quite as impressive, I think. Not just in terms of their actions, but in terms of how well written they are. So, can't hold them against their iconic status and just their general personalities. But I feel like Snow White, like, you gotta have an iconic one there, obviously.
Yeah, and I think Snow White's also probably the most grown up of those early classics.
That is true, she does.
Because she takes care of these dwarves.
The dwarves, that's true.
I mean, they sort of take care of her also, but she's sort of the mother figure to them.
That is true.
You know?
She grows up quickly, in a way. You're right.
She does. I mean, she's probably around the same age as Cinderella, but she sort of takes on that motherly role.
I'm okay with her being on your list. I'm just surprised she's so high.
I love Snow White so much, and she was sort of my, like, that was my Disney princess for a long time growing up.
It's a good argument. I mean, I didn't think of it that way, but you do make a very good point.
Thank you.
Yeah.
All right, well, that's my number 2. So, Justin, on to your list.
All right. My number 5, that was on your list, Dan, and that would be Giselle from Enchanted. She's probably my favorite of the less intelligent Disney princesses.
Oh, traditional.
Yes.
Well, again, yeah. I mean, she plays off of these stereotyped
airheaded,
ones from
nice, pretty girl.
Sure.
Yeah.
I thought Amy Adams did a very good job with her character. I love the fish out of water antic, and she's just so irresistibly likable throughout the entire movie. She has this great air to it, especially with all the song numbers. It's impossible not to smile during it. It's really a Disney movie I wish had more. I wish people talked about more.
And it was really her mainstream breakthrough role.
Pretty much,
You know?
yeah.
I mean, she was nominated for Junebug before that, but who saw that?
Exactly.
You know?
I don't even know what that is.
Yeah, I don't know. She got nominated for it. That's all I got.
Something.
My number 4, much like you, Joe, was Jasmine from Aladdin. I do understand this character has a lot of criticisms. In grad school, we had this, one of my colleagues made a big deal about this documentary called Mickey Mouse Monopoly, which was sort of looking at some of the drawbacks Disney princesses have had on women over the years. Jasmine was argued in the documentary as being kind of a seductress. I don't agree with that at all. But I do like the fact that she's defiant, but she's also very intelligent. She's very street smart. And she doesn't always play in the damsel in distress thing like several of the Disney princesses do. My number 3 is another unofficial one, and that is Elanwi from The Black Cauldron. I think this is quite possibly the most criminally underrated Disney film. What I think is interesting about her character is we don't see her at the start of it, but it's a really clever convention. She's actually rescuing the hero instead of being the damsel in distress. And she serves as sort of the voice of reason in their group and turns it not into this big, it's a hero's quest, but more or less of a, hey, it's a whole team effort, which I really liked.
I don't know. It's been a long time since I've seen it.
Oh, it has for me too, but I mean, she did stick out to me a lot in this, and I do like that convention a lot.
Well, it's an underrated movie in general.
Number 2 is Belle. Very smart character. Much like Jasmine in the documentary as well. Also had some criticisms. I don't agree with them either. Just really good character, really intelligent character. I do see some fault in her in terms of creating sort of this gold digger mindset, but I do think she's probably one of the better role models in the Disney Princess universe.
Good pick for number 2.
That is a good pick for number 2. Joe, what's your number 1?
My number 1 is the gold digger, Belle. You know, no.
Am I wrong?
Yes.
Yes.
How?
I think Belle is a great role model for children because she helps to, encourage education, being, you're having your own mind, your own opinion, standing on your own ground. She helped to change this terrible person into a wonderful person through a lot of patience, defied a lot of expectations out of loyalty to save her father, give up everything she had for the sake of someone else. I like her for that reason and many others. I think that she's an excellent character, Justin, and you must kind of agree because she was your number 2.
No, I
don't know about the whole gold digger thing. I mean, yeah, she eventually
molds him into the perfect man, and he turns into the perfect man
because he wants to save himself. If he didn't, I mean, it's saving himself both metaphorically and literally in the story. I mean, if he didn't change to become a better person, he would be cursed to be a beast forever. I don't know. I guess I can see it, but I think it's a kind of a loose argument.
Well, Belle is my number one. I mean,
I'm sorry.
What else is there to say? I mean, she's fantastic.
As Dan would say, great person.
She is a great person, and I would argue she really was the first Disney princess to break the mold. Because other than Ariel, it had been a while, decades, since there was a classic Disney princess.
And she wasn't even really a princess.
And she wasn't really a princess, but she's Belle, so okay. But yeah, I mean, she was the first, like, really smart princess, and obviously, yeah, I mean, I think there was nothing wrong with her trying to...
Do you see that at all?
No, I don't see what the argument is. I don't think her goal was to necessarily make the perfect man. She just was... She had fallen in love with this person, for lack of a better word.
I could see the Stockholm Syndrome thing.
Yeah, it is almost like a Stockholm Syndrome.
I could see the abusive
kind of is.
relation. I see that
definitely
as
kind of is.
That's more of a realistic flaw I could see coming up. But if there's a manipulation thing, I think it might be partially due to that whole thing.
Right. Well, anyway, we all love Belle. She's all of our top two. So
yeah, there shouldn't be this much
there
contention.
shouldn't be that much. Justin, what's your number one?
My number one is Tiana from The Princess and the Frog.
Ah,
wow! Bet you're glad I showed you that yesterday.
I am. The main reason being, I feel like she's, out of all the Disney princesses, she's probably the one that has the most realistic and attainable goal. They're never trying to say, do this and it's going to happen immediately. They're saying you got to work for it, and she does, and I really like that. And yes, there's a love interest. Yes, she has a man. He doesn't really like become that big central component until probably around the second act, but
well, she's a frog half the movie.
Exactly. But they really do make it this big component of, yes, you can have your dreams come true, but there is a hard work component to it, which I think is a very, very good message to hit home for kids.
it is.
Yeah, good choice. All right, well, good list. And speaking of the Disney princesses, let's segue that into our new classic. And this week, that is Pixar's Brave. And Joe's going to have that for us.
Brave is a 2012 fantasy film from Pixar Studios, directed by Brenda Chapman, Mark Andrews, and Steve Purcell. It stars Kelly MacDonald, Emma Thompson, and Craig Ferguson again. Must be a theme here. It's set in Scottish Highlands. It follows the rebellious Princess Merida as her mother pressures her to conform to her duties and marry to keep the tribes at peace. Not wanting to adhere to this, Merida seeks out a witch to help her change her fate, which she mentions over and over again in the film, asking the witch to change her mother, though the spell turns out to be very literal, as her mother is transformed into a bear. This turns into a light-hearted adventure in which the two must put aside their differences, strengthen their relationship, and discover a way to lift the curse. Brave is a film that I admit I have mixed feelings about. I'll start by saying that it's excellent, though. I can honestly say that up to this point, visually, it's the most beautiful film that I've seen in theaters. The animation is gorgeous. I loved every attention to every little detail, much like How to Train a Dragon. I just loved everything about it. I remember being completely encapsulated by it. You can tell that a lot of effort was really put into this technically, and the character of Merida is one of the strongest female characters that Disney/Pixar has ever produced. This film was important in that it has a heroine in an adventure film who is a female and one who is also intelligent, complicated, and likable, something that is still rather uncommon. The closest thing I could say as a comparison might be Katniss Everdeen. It helps to break the traditional ideas of the standard fairy tale and create an interesting, if what, a little underdeveloped world. The only real issue I have with the film is that the story that holds all these elements together isn't a bad one, it's just so low-key that it keeps the movie from attaining an air of epic grandeur. This also has to do with advertising, as the movie played the action in darker tones and had the simpler and more lighthearted nature of the story. I'm not quite sure if it fits the awesomeness of such a character as Merida, but it does work. It might not be the Narnia or Lord of the Rings that I was expecting, but I discovered something new and ultimately worth watching, and I give it an A-.
Very nice. Brave certainly covers new ground for the studio of Pixar, as it's their first princess story, and it certainly takes some interesting twists along the way. However, new ground for Pixar, in this case, turns out to be somewhat old ground for their distribution studios, Disney, as we just heard about with this week's Top 5. The unique animation studio was still able to put their own stamp on it, though, and it certainly looks gorgeous, as Joe hit upon. It's probably the best looking of all of the Pixar films. And I also give them credit for having a largely unknown actress to play Merida in McDonald, as opposed to an A-lister just going through the motions. She gives a fantastic presence to Merida and really helps to propel the story. At the end of the day, though, it has a little bit of an originality problem with the princess story, but some of the side things in it, for example, the mother-daughter combination, and like we talked about in our top 5, Merida's sort of female empowerment is new. But for a studio that's only stumbled once, that's with Cars 2, even the lesser films in the canon are great, and Brave also gets an A- from me. Justin?
I've always admired the bulk of Pixar's filmography. I consider Cars 2 to be a forgivable mistake, considering the circumstances, but I take issue when they borrow a bit too much from other films. A Bug's Life was essentially a more family-friendly version of the Magnificent Seven, or Seven Samurai to be more precise, and Brave lovingly borrows from Disney film Brother Bear. Granted, there are differences, and neither film is bad by any means, but rather it seems sort of underwhelming when one knows how intelligent and creative Pixar's writers are and how limitless their capabilities are. Fortunately, with an absolutely gorgeous visual design and a vast assortment of witty characters, this is able to be overlooked at least slightly. Although it's darker than most of Pixar's repertoire, save perhaps Toy Story 3, it still offers a fascinating world with an overall good message about respect, as well as taking control of one's life. Overall, Brave's far from being the best Pixar offering, but in contrast to Cars 2, it served as a major leap back in the right direction, and I give it a B+.
I actually think a lot of movies in Pixar's filmography are kind of dark.
They have undertones.
I mean, Toy Story 3 you mentioned, obviously. But listen, as terrible as Cars 2 was, there was some, like, really dark scenes in there where they were almost going to kill Mater.
Bug's Life was dark.
Incredibles is pretty dark.
Incredibles is pretty dark.
I mean,
Incredibles was darker than I thought it was going to be.
Yeah, I think Pixar actually does pretty well with the dark stuff.
Well, they're like traditional Disney. I mean, the overall layer is pretty light, but there's some pretty dark things going on. Mm-hmm. I mean, Lion King, Notre Dame, probably good examples there.
Yeah, certainly the more recent, like maybe past 20, the Disney Renaissance, as it were.
I'd say one that was consistently dark would be something like The Black Cauldron, where the whole movie's pretty dark.
As a kid, I was never really bothered by it when it got released on DVD.
But you know what I mean? It's like the overall atmosphere. There's some like fun, cutesy characters to kind of lighten the mood, but the overall tone is pretty grim, which is something they kind of bounce back with a little bit.
So I don't think it's necessarily that surprising that Brave is dark. I don't think we expected it based on the preview.
Well,
but
it was dark, but only in spurts.
Mm-hmm.
Like it wasn't like that was my problem with it, was that, I mean, you say it's one of the darkest. I mean, like the whole mythology and like the antagonist, which there barely is one, is kind of dark. But the main story, which is kind of the mom-daughter thing, is pretty cutesy. And as you would say, it's good, but that's the bulk of the movie, is this happy, which I liked it, but I wouldn't.
Yeah, I didn't necessarily come away from it thinking, wow, that was a really dark Pixar movie.
I was personally disappointed because I didn't think it was dark as the trailer, the one trailer I said, because it's literally like they show you the bear clawing. Like, I wasn't expecting, like, Silence of the Lambs or anything. But, I was just saying, it's not that. And I just thought that it was going to be a little darker overall in tone. But I'd say overall it was uplifting.
Pixar rarely stumbles. So even though I think we can all agree this isn't right up there among the Toy Stories and
but think about it.
The Incredibles is, but
B+,
it's still a good movie.
A-.
Yeah, it's still a really good movie.
Pixar's still
make no mistake,
killing it.
Yeah, I would definitely agree with that. All right, well, up next is our old classic, and this week that was my pick, and I chose Private Parts. This is a film near and dear to my heart, with my decade of professional radio on the resume. And I've wanted to run it for Old Classic for a while now, since I knew neither of my colleagues here had ever seen it. The 1997 comedy is a film version of the best-selling autobiography Stern released just a few years earlier. It begins with Howard's infamously terrible character, Fart Man, on an MTV Video Music Awards show, and then takes it through voiceover back to his childhood and teen years, and from there the film mainly chronicles the career and personal highlights and lowlights that got him to where he is today, or, in this case, the early 90s. It stars Stern and many of his co-workers like Fred Norris and Robin Quivers as themselves. Mary McCormack plays Howard's wife Allison, and in early roles, Allison Janney and Paul Giamatti play heads of two different stations of Stern's career path that give him nothing but resistance. We see a lot of biopics, but one of the things that makes Private Parts truly special is that, as Stern plays himself, it's an auto-biopic, which I really can't even think of any others. Even a recent film Fanatics example, All That Jazz, which takes place only 4 years before the film's release, Bob Fosse did not play himself. As Stern plays himself 5 days a week for hours on the radio, he is a natural in the role, and since his radio show used to be filmed for television, he never plays to the camera or overacts. He's very comfortable in front of the cameras, and him and Robin and his whole crew are great. It's by far the most realistic film about radio I've ever seen, an absolute riot, especially in any scene where Stern is rivaling his WNBC boss, who he dubbed Pig Vomit, played by Giamatti. Other than some clunky scene changes that, while original, are for the hardcore Stern fan only, the fact that I would have liked to have seen more specifics with some of the people in the film, including his wife, and a poorly done final scene, I think it is a fantastic comedy. I may be showing a little radio bias here, but I give Howard Stern's Private Parts an A. Justin?
Howard Stern has always wanted to shock his audiences, but is there more than what the man puts on the radio? It's a big question, and fortunately the adaptation of Stern's book handles it beautifully by never truly romanticizing his antics, but also never saying that Stern shied away from having fun with it. Admittedly, it does take a bit to get going, with a prologue that's nice, albeit not really necessary, and feels more or less like a celebrity-laden bookend to the film. But once it does, the humor comes fast and furious, and it never stops. This comes largely thanks to Stern doing an excellent job working with his cast, who are every bit in love with his classic, infamous absurdity as he is, as well as those serving in opposition, such as Dan mentioned, with Paul Giamatti as the hilarious antagonist. As a result, the film becomes a wild and crazy story about the road to fame and all the struggles with trying to balance the radio personality with Stern's own personal life, in which the two often blur. Much like anything with Howard Stern, Private Parts won't be for everyone, and certainly not for the faint of heart, but it's a fun ride that I like to believe could someday get expanded upon even further, and I give it a B+.
Joe?
This movie was very funny. I think that what makes it work is that it is a biopic done by the actual man, and it's mostly pretty honest. I don't know how fairly it treats the executives, but otherwise it seems pretty genuine. It was a strong story, and he uses his radio identity for brilliant narration. I never got tired of it. Interestingly, though, some of the events are crude, but the context isn't so much. As far as the politics in the movie, exemplified best by the segments, the transitional ones that Dan mentioned earlier, well, that's where things get tricky. I'm all for promoting expression and freedom of speech, and it can be tough to define that line. This is true in all of entertainment, and much of it goes back to radio. Stern's show was much like the South Park of its day. How much can you get away with? I can't honestly say I'm completely on his side in all these situations. If the movie had tried to show the execs in a slightly less biased light, then it may have been a nicer balance. Plus, I can't condone demeaning anyone for shock value. Still, it was a well-paced, well-written, and well-acted comedy, and I give it an A-.
Nice. Yeah, unfortunately, from what I understand, and granted, this may be a little bit on the bias side, from Stern, but, he got resistance at pretty much every angle of his career. Well, with maybe the characterization is a little bit...
Okay.
Coarse.
Let me give you an example.
Mm-hmm.
Pig Vomit.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe it's because I like Paul Giamatti. I felt a little bad for him. The reason I felt like I understand why they did it for comedic effect,
mm-hmm.
and I'm sure that they might have been, tough on him and might have been annoying. I'm sure of that, but I understand that a lot of things he was doing were questionable, and I can understand why there was resistance. And I'm not sure if they really drew attention to that.
I definitely understand why there was resistance, because obviously in anything that's like groundbreaking to any sort of medium,
I'm just saying,
for better or worse, whether it's groundbreaking, good or bad, but you're gonna get that resistance. But in the opening scene where we see Paul Giamatti, he's telling his bosses at NBC, leave it to me. I'll make this guy wish he never worked here. I'll get him to quit, this and that. So...
But I don't know.
It comes off as a little bit less sympathetic in that regard, I think. Maybe some of his methods were a little bit too extreme, but here they hire this guy, Howard Stern, from a #1 show in his market. They bring him up to New York, give him a 3-year contract without ever hearing the show, which
sounds
I fault them for.
Sounds dumb, actually.
All they did was look at the ratings and said, okay, we need him.
That is true. They should have researched it, I guess, beforehand.
Yeah. And this was the early 80s, so who knows how easy it was. I mean, I guess, barring going down to Washington, D.C. to listen to a show, I don't know if it was as easy to,
I guess,
swap tapes of a show or whatever.
Did they record them?
I don't know if they did that early.
Maybe if you were saying, hey, if we're going to try out, maybe I have a demo tape of one of my shows.
Yeah, you had a demo reel, I guess.
Listen.
That's true.
But
they recording him. It's not like he applied for the job. They found him and courted him. So I guess based on the numbers, they decided they didn't need to hear a tape or whatever.
Yeah.
But, so that's kind of weird to begin with.
Well, what I'm saying is it's autobiographical. It's from one guy's perspective, and he's quite a character with his own very unique points of view about things.
I agree.
And I do think that, like I said, it was fairly honest in the sense that I think that he tried to portray it as he knew that there was a line, and he was trying to do it just so that he could, make people laugh and get people to think. But that was another part of his life. He did try to balance it. What I guess I'm saying is that I can't trust everything the guy says in his own movie. Fair. You're going to have villains that you're going to demonize. I don't know. I wasn't there. I don't know if other people... I don't know. I didn't read the book. Did they actually interview other people from NBC? Maybe some?
But I don't remember. It's been too long.
But would the execs be like, oh, yeah, sure, I totally, want to put that guy down. You know what I'm saying?
Yes, I do.
I have to give them the benefit of the doubt a little bit.
Okay. And that's fair. I think one thing we do come away with, though, in the movie is that this is a quote-unquote character that he's being played, and off air we were talking about his hosting abilities now on America's Got Talent. He is actually a pretty nice guy,
Like I said, I caught a couple of his shows when he was recording them for TV. I think that, what was the channel?
Yeah, Channel 9.
Channel 9, whatever. Yeah. It's late at night. I thought he was an interesting guy. I mean, there was some racy things on the show, but normally it was just him talking about politics and stuff.
Right. Well, and you see from the events that take place in the early parts of his career where execs were trying to break up him and Robin or the team, he's always been really faithful to his employees and his coworkers, which is proven that they're still with him. I mean, everybody that you see in that movie is still on the Howard Stern show 30 years after the fact.
That must say something.
And that says something.
Yeah.
Next week we will have our listener's choice, so be listening for that. And if you have a listener's choice request for next month, you can certainly voice that opinion on the comment section here on our YouTube page. All right, and finally is our Oscar A to Z film, and this week that is Amarcord. And this is a 1973 film that won the Best Foreign Film Oscar. And what brings it on the A to Z is it was nominated for Best Director for Federico Fellini and Best Original Screenplay, which he also co-wrote. And Justin's going to tell us about that.
Set during 1930s Italy, Amarcord focuses on the impact of fascism seen through the eyes of several people through vignettes. Among them include Tita, played by Bruno Zenin, a young teen slowly coming of age through the events, and his patriarchal father, played by Armando Brancia, among others. When it comes to finding directors that truly are the definition of magical realism, I can't think of one that fits more perfectly than Federico Fellini. His wild and vivid filmmaking technique gave rise to the phrase Fellini-esque, and it's really not hard to see why. My issue with his directing is while the two films I have seen, the other one being 8.5, this magical realism can sometimes suffocate an already interesting narrative. In contrast to 8.5, this doesn't really get implemented until roughly the end of the first act, but once it starts taking hold of each vignette, The interest truly comes and goes until it's really hard to tell when it'll start getting interesting again. It's still a beautifully shot film and tackling a very big subject matter most films don't usually attempt to cover, but it does take a bit away from the overall end product. Amarcord may have its faults, and like most art films, probably needs to be watched several times to truly be appreciated, but I cannot overlook the directorial effort that went into this film, and I give it a B-.
All right, Joe, let's hear from you about Amarcord.
I liked one plot in this movie. I found the one patriarch who was trying to keep his family together to be the most compelling. Some of the humor was over the top, and the acting was a bit iffy at times. Still, I liked this man's struggle to earn his family's respect. I found it really interesting, and perhaps an ironic jab at the whole concept of the older generations leading the youth in times of change and unrest. Why am I focusing on this particular part? Well, it's the only storyline that I was somewhat invested in. There were other interesting characters, but none of them had any real development. Most of them didn't have even really established personalities. I know that these are vignettes, but the beauty of the traditionally used vignette is to establish a mood, give the characters identities, and explore a brief theme and move on to the next story. Here we just kind of go back and forth between the broken outer layer of several stories. It does have some decent photography, as Justin mentioned, and a few memorable, if not awkward, scenes. Still, most of the characters I didn't really care about past the first 15 minutes or so. Perhaps it could have benefited from a shorter runtime or focus on one story. Whatever the case may be, I'm still not sure who died, and that was the one story that I was actually paying attention to. This may deserve a rewatch, but I'm going to give this one a D.
Wow. Yeah, it's hard to say that this movie is even super artsy or pretentious. It's just poorly executed on almost every level. It starts out actually fairly straightforward and then veers wildly, like you guys sort of said with the vignettes. It just goes from storyline to storyline with little continuity or explanation, and only one of the stories is even remotely interesting. Joe hit the nail on the head with that one, and even that one goes off the rails about midway through the film, culminating in a truly bizarre sex scene. We got so lost in what was happening that at one point we do see some of the characters at a funeral, and Joe asked us who died, and neither Justin nor I could come up with an answer other than a guess or two. I still don't know.
I'm pretty sure it was his brother, but I'm only inferring that.
Yeah, exactly. It's all a guess. I'm not sure if this type of movie was new and exciting in 1973, or if it got its awards love simply because of Fellini's attachment, but it is a mess, and I give it a D+. Other than some beautiful scenes.
That's the only reason I really.
That's the only reason. I mean, the characters just. I couldn't
make it through this movie.
Yeah,
I didn't.
It was bad.
I didn't like it.
Justin, obviously, it worked for you a little bit better than us.
Please, give us some points.
For starters, I always have a big appreciation for cinematography of any form. Fellini really knows what he's doing, and I really like what I've seen in this. I like the way that he made this atmosphere breathe, at least during the start when the storyline was at least moving somewhat steadily. When we started getting further into the magical realism that it was sort of suffocating it did kind of bug me a little bit, but some stuff was still very well shot, and I did really like the symbolism. I wish he had done a little bit more with it so there would be more room to interpret, but I feel like he was trying to focus on different aspects of it, which I feel like gives it a more universal perspective. Do I think it was done perfectly? No, but I don't deny that it was an interesting perspective, and I think it was very unique for the time. The perversity thing, I see where you both are coming from, but let's face it, this is the world we live in. People have sex.
I'm fine with sex scenes.
I'm fine with sex scenes.
I just
it was
context.
Utterly bizarre. Yeah, it was completely out of context and bizarre. And probably unnecessary.
Unless the sex scene furthers the story,
but it's still his coming of age.
It wasn't executed well. I don't even really know this character very well. All I know is that he is a character who's coming of age. That's really all I know.
And that's the central component. I mean, this is still an art film, so there are means of which to interpret it among others.
I didn't even find it that artsy. That's why I didn't like it.
That's what I mean. Like I didn't think it was that artsy.
I like stuff that's really stylized. Maybe I just didn't like the style. I mean, you call it magical realism. I found this film boring.
Well, there's different types of magical realism, like the short film Paperman, magical realism.
There you go.
But
yeah, well, I liked Paperman.
My point being, magical realism comes in many forms.
I mean,
and this is just one of them.
I liked some of the scenes. Like, I liked the peacock. You know, I liked...
The guy up in the tree was alright.
I liked that scene. I thought it was kind of funny. Like, I liked a few little things, but I can't honestly say that I enjoyed it or I felt it held together as a narrative, even by standards of vignettes. I just did not like this movie.
It's not cohesive at all.
I would never recommend this to anybody. I mean, maybe...
But at the same time, I'm not sure it's supposed to be.
I guess you could say they're doing a vignette of, like, just the whole life of the city.
Which I would agree with. And I think that's...
But, I mean, I guess I feel like there... With the exception of that one storyline, I didn't feel like any of the characters even had really defined attributes of any kind. Like, the guy that was coming of age.
How do you represent an entire city, Joe?
With a few lines of dialogue here or there? I mean...
How can you say, oh yes, a city full of thousands and thousands of people, give them personality traits?
You can't attach yourself to any of them.
That's the thing.
Because you're trying to...
It's too much of an outside perspective. And like for instance, like I said, the one I liked that I thought was done well, we didn't go very deep into the family, but there was something. I got a general sense for what's going on, which is fine, establishing a mood. But like that one scene with the military, there are no characters in that scene. They're just people marching.
Because you're representing the military.
I mean, I get it. Yes, they're showing the militaristic fascist ideals, but how did that connect directly with the family storyline?
And what are they feeling?
The introduction to fascism?
What are they thinking? What are they feeling?
No, that's the thing. In the movie, I get the fact they're trying to be connected. If there was a direct correlation between fascism directly affecting that man's family life, it was not established at all. It seemed like a completely separate story. Maybe because it wasn't affecting
a new movement. I mean, everything ripples eventually, and he does bring it up several times.
He does, but I just didn't feel like that was the central point of his story.
I mean, what'd you want them to do, Joe? Drop a bomb on their house or something?
No, I'm just saying that it could have been focused on a little bit more. Like, I felt like what was going on with him, with his relationship with his brother, and trying to keep his family together, I didn't feel like it was directly related to the fascist element, for instance.
No, but they're showing you one component that still remained during the fascist movement.
Or the educational system. Like, I liked some of those scenes, but I didn't feel like they...
I did actually really like the educational part. I wish they had gone further with that.
But that's what I'm saying. It felt like it didn't really lead anywhere.
All right, yeah, easily one of the worst of the Oscar movies for Joe and I, but we are going to have to wrap it up there. That was Amarcord we were talking about from Federico Fellini. We'll have another Oscar movie next week. Hopefully it'll be a little bit better received. All right, well, if you have not subscribed yet to our channel, go ahead and do that. And you can also join us on the Facebook group, which is Film Fanatics with an exclamation point. And our Twitter feed is @FilmFanaticsPod. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you back here next week. Bye!